Welcome back to the Baschamania podcast. This is episode 160, and I'm your host, as always, Justin Basch. On today's show, my man Yianni D is back on to talk about all that he's been up to recently, what's coming up next, freestyle versus folkstyle, NIL. I'm sure we'll dive into some other stuff too. Before Yianni joins, I want to shout out our sponsor, Attack, as this show is brought to you by our friends at Attack. Attack's a workout app, but really so much more. They're an AI strength and conditioning coach, a nutritionist, and mentality mentor, all in one app, right in your pocket with you wherever you go. Your age, your goals, your program. Attack will help get you where you need to go. So download the Attack app on the Apple App Store. It's ATAC. They're also attack.app on social. So give them a follow, watch some of the great content they share to help you get stronger, healthier, and better. And they have some top athletes involved, from Jordan Burroughs to Peyton Preston to Real Woods, you name it. They've got so many great wrestlers involved. So thank you, Attack, for sponsoring the show. With that said, let's dive in. Yianni D, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
You know, it's funny. Like, we've been friends for a while. My company obviously sponsors you. And I still get crap from people on the internet that I write Yianni D on stuff. Like when I make a graphic because of like the length of your last name, I'll just put like, let's say I make a quick graphic for like who's in the finals or who this. And I'm like, Yianni D versus so-and-so. And there's literally comments almost every time. It's like, can you spell it out? It's Diakomahalis. I'm like, dude. I'm like, well, I like the Yianni D brand.
No, dude, I think that's cooler. And it's like, it's the one name thing, you know?
Yeah, it's like you don't even have to put D. Like Yianni is probably the most unique name. There's a couple unique names, but like that's got to be. If you look at like some of the world team, it's like Jordan, David. Nobody has Yianni, so I like that. So I want to talk about last night. You kind of reignited the freestyle folk style conversation, which is always fun because I'm on your side. I think I spent 30 minutes at NCAA's at like 9 a.m. talking with Shane Sparks about why he likes folk style. So we'll get into that. Before we do, let's talk a little bit about the season, because you obviously had a great season, won another NCAA championship. Let's start with that championship. And I guess for me, one of the things I think about the most at NCAA's is obviously the video that went nuts. Have some nuts, which, by the way, if you're watching this, listening to this, those shirts are still available, right?
Yeah, they're up there now. So you can get them sportcombat.com. You know,
go get your Have Some Nuts t-shirt. So what went into that? What went into like, because I know you, and you're one of the most analytical people I know when it comes to wrestling. And like, you're very critical on yourself. I don't think anybody's as big of a critic of you as you are. What went into that? Because there was like no time. Like he interviewed you right after the match and you already had those thoughts like established.
It was literally like towards the end of the match. The match wasn't even over yet. And I was like, I can't believe this is how bad I'm wrestling right now. Not even bad. It wasn't like I was wrestling bad. I was just like, I can't believe this is like what I'm now. It looked, I don't know what other people thought, but it felt very underwhelming. I was like, man, I'm wrestling so bad. I'm tired. I can't believe I'm tired. What am I tired for? All this like blah, 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 blah. So I was like already stewing in my brain, like walking. As soon as the match ended, I'm like, God, I suck. Like I was walking back towards Mike in the Ohio State coach's hands, and he just like had this face, and I was like, I know. Like no one was happy about that. You know what I mean? It was just like, all right, you won, but whatever.
It's always. Oh, go ahead.
So yeah, basically, like I understand that match or that interview was walking off the mat, but I probably had a minute of just like marinating that little displeasure with how I wrestle.
It's so funny to me because I'm always amazed. And I think when J.O. was on here one of the last times, he mentioned about how much, I think it was after Olympic trials, actually, and he was breaking down matches. And he's telling me how much he's thinking during a match. And I'm like, it's crazy because especially like a guy like you, you're scrambling and you're moving so quick that to be able to keep up mentally with your match as you're going, are you doing that the whole time? Like, how much is it just like go with the flow, especially like in the scrambles? Like, how much are you thinking about it versus what happens?
Almost the whole time. I'm using my brain. Probably the entire match. Like, I not think going here and then it's going here, but it's like score, time, position. Oh, I faked and he did that. Like, oh, I grabbed him and he did that. Like, oh, he did that. I got to do this. You know what I mean? Where it's a lot of subliminal self. It's like I'm talking to myself. You know how you kind of stuff out, you don't think about it. That's like what I'm doing in my head. I'm just letting my brain roll as the match is going. So, and like Jordan, like brought up Jordan, he does the same thing. He'll fake and be like, oh, that guy did that. And he'll fake again and be like, oh, he did that again. And then take it. You know what I mean? So, but for me, it helps me, you know what I mean? Because I try to notice what a guy's doing. I try to pick up on how his feet are moving, what his hands are doing, what his stance height is like, you know, all these things, what's going through his head. And I try to get all that rolling while I'm wrestling, right? Because they're all things I can use, you know what I mean? They're all going to do different things for me, depending on what I'm trying.
Do you, obviously winning another championship is amazing. And my thought would be that your finals match was your favorite match, but out of the 5 matches you wrestled, did you have a favorite one where you liked the way you wrestled the best?
I think I only liked the way I wrestled in the finals. If we're being honest, it wasn't like I was wrestling bad. It just, I don't know. It's like I would walk off the mat and be like, that was fine. You know what I mean? And that's like, it's a little bit unfair, right?
Is it straight score? Like, is it straight, like, if I don't tech, I'm not happy? Or like, what is it that?
It's just like, it feels a certain way. So like I have a hard time watching the other ones. Cause you know how if you watch yourself do something bad, it's like, ugh.
The worst. Every podcast, that's how I feel.
Right? No, but they're good. Like if podcast, you're not watching it.
Yep.
And you might even be like, wow, this is horrible in the middle of it.
Yep.
Same kind of feeling. And it was like, but it wasn't like I could sit here and be like, oh, well, you know, I wasn't doing this right. It wasn't like I was doing something wrong. It just didn't feel right. Like I understood the level of wrestling that I could have been doing.
Yeah.
And I wasn't really doing that. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And then my thought process was like, well, I've been wrestling horrible all weekend. So not horrible, but I'm a little harder on myself, you know, at times. But I was like, all right, I have been wrestling great all weekend. Might as well finish this one good. Then I wrestled a lot better in the finals.
One thing that was interesting to me about your season this year, and I'm always amazed. I love working with athletes like you who are so focused. And it's funny because you have such a respect for other people. And even for me, you're like, you asked me for something on the website, like the week of NCAAs. And you're like, listen, I know it's NCAAs, you're traveling, this and that, so don't worry about it. I'm like, me? Like, I'm just traveling to go watch, hang out, talk, whatever. You're preparing to compete and also dealing with these things. What was it like having NIL this year, dealing with sponsors, kind of growing your brand? And I don't think people realize that sometimes I was sending a wrestler today a contract that somebody sent him. And in my head, I'm like, man, it's really almost becoming like being a CEO as you're an athlete, because running your deals and coordinating stuff and dealing with the finances and fulfilling your obligations is a lot. What was that like this year for you?
No, I mean, we make the joke, me and Vito, like all the other guys who are sponsored by Spartan are like our coworkers now. But there was a point where it was stressful, and I don't know who said it to me, if it was Kyle or I just kind of figured it out myself, or maybe one of the other guys in the Olympics. But I was just like, you know, this would be so much cooler if I just let myself enjoy it instead of like stressing about it.
Yeah.
So now, especially because I'm very obsessive, especially about wrestling, which is probably a gift. To the point where I've got everyone's probably like, all right, like put it down, just think about something else, like don't worry about it. So I'll if I'm really wound up about like, oh, I got a big match this weekend, and for whatever reason, if I'm getting wound up or I'm getting anxious or excited, I'll be like, well, you know, I need something to occupy my mind. If it's not school, like, you know, if I don't have any homework, if I don't have any tests coming up, then like, what am I going to do? Right. But then there's just something that when I've got some free time or I need to unwind and just take a break from thinking about wrestling in school, I can think about that. And it's something, it's like fun, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, we're making a shirt, you know, doing a shoe, doing a this, doing a that. Like, it's something cool you can kind of think about, you know?
Yeah. And I don't think people realize that, especially when you're aligned with the right people, it's not like if you're in a deal with somebody that's trying to monopolize your time or take advantage of you, then it can become very negative very quick, where they're like hounding you, like, hey, I need you to put this post out right now, and you don't want to. That's something different. You've obviously found a good groove with being involved with people who you jive really well with. And I saw that this weekend with the Spartan Nationals thing. You and Carr and Kylie, like, you guys all are having fun, and it feels organic. It doesn't feel like, obviously Spartan's a sponsor of yours and you're doing certain things of obligation, but it looks organic. Do you have these conversations often with them about what you want to do, what you don't want to do?
Yeah. So the one thing that I really appreciate about the guys at Spartan is like, they're like, tell us no. I don't know. We like, their whole thing is they're like, we want guys who want to be a part of what we're doing. And they want guys who like they're saying, they're like, we don't want you to advertise because we're paying you. We want you to advertise because you're like proud of it.
Yep.
So like, if we do, like we did those shirts, like have some nuts or whatever. And like, obviously at the end of the day, like it's making me money.
Yep.
But it's like, I think it's a really cool shirt and I think it's funny. And I like the little squirrel that they made. So it's like, I'm trying to make it as genuine as I can, not be like a walking billboard. You know what I mean?
Yep. And I think that's also sustainable.
Yeah, because then it's not like effort. It's just, it just gives me more opportunities to kind of, because that's what people talk about, right? Is like your social media is like, oh, well, you got to let people know who you are. Like, that's always what I would hear people say. And I was like, I don't know what that means. I like wrestling. I like wrestling and thinking about wrestling and watching TV. Like, it's very, you know what I mean? But
yeah.
Now I kind of get it. It's like, well, I like this squirrel. I think it's funny. Like, here you go. Or, oh, what are you doing on spring break? Well, I was training in a bunch of different places and then ended up in Florida for the last little bit of it. Like little things like that. So if anything, kind of just gives me an opportunity to have something other than just like, here's pictures of me wrestling, or it just gives me something to occupy my time with other than go, 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 go. Because I've been told I need to every once in a while, like, chill out.
Yeah, it's always good. I was just telling a buddy of mine who's a workaholic entrepreneur, like, dude, stop over tonight, have a glass of wine, like chill by the fire for 10 minutes and just have that little bit of disconnect. It doesn't have to be much. It makes a world of a difference. Speaking of Florida, I did see you were training with Juan Archuleta. How was that for you?
He's awesome. I mean, he's shockingly dedicated to what he's doing, and he works really hard. He works really, really hard. And, I learned a lot from him and just the other guys I got to be around when I was out there. And it was awesome just getting to train with him. And it was cool. It was cool getting to see like what fighters do, you know what I mean? Because I think that stuff's super cool. But I mean, just the whole, he's awesome. I couldn't say enough good things about him.
Is it more you helping him with wrestling? Is it you kind of watching the MMA aspect? Like, what's the dynamic like?
So he's got a fight coming up next weekend for the Bellator belt. And I guess fighting a guy who got some pretty good wrestling. And I had been doing similar training to what he has been doing through Frank Pirelli, who's our RTC coach. He's been putting me through. So, and Frank and Juan know each other well. So Juan was like, hey, I want to bring in a guy can help me wrestle, get ready for this fight. Because Juan wrestled in college, he wrestled at Purdue. Yep. But he was like, I want to bring in someone who like, he's like, I want to bring somebody in who is an active wrestler, someone who can give me a wrestling feel. Yep. And reached out to people, to my understanding. And Frank was like, well, we got Yianni, if you want to send him out there, it's a spring break, this week. So that's right around the time he'd be getting ready. And he's like, yeah, that'd be perfect. So I was out there for about a week, just kind of doing what he did and following around, learning from him. So that was awesome.
Does it make you itch towards doing MMA? Like, I love as soon as any wrestler posts a photo training with a fighter, it's instantly Yianni MMA ? Question mark. Like,
no, I mean, like I say all the time, like, it'd be so cool to fight one time. You know what I mean? Like, and punch in the face really hard. But you're a different kind of dude, and for me, I have a really high level of appreciation for wrestling.
Yeah,
and a lot of things that I want to do in wrestling, and I feel like I'd be cutting my career short if I had left wrestling and gone to fighting, because that meant I could still probably be wrestling.
Yeah, no, for sure. Let's talk a little bit. I want to talk about what's coming up on the senior level. I do also want to talk about the freestyle folk style thing. Let's talk about that for a few minutes. So, for context, tell people what you tweeted yesterday, the backgrounds.
So I'm in a class in the labor relations college. I'm not in that school, but you can take classes in different colleges at Cornell. So I'm taking a labor relations class called Advocacy and Debate, and so we're getting assignments. One thing a week. We have to debate. We've done some papers. We had some exams or whatever, and the guy was like, "All right, for your assignment, it's due the Wednesday after spring break." And kids went, "Oh," and he's like, "No." So all we had to do, we had to stay under 2 pages. So we had to be very concise, but we had to pick anything that we could debate about, and we had to write out the problem with the current model, the cause for that problem, our proposed answer, and then net benefit, right? And we had to fit that under 2 pages with a little conclusion.
There's no way you did that. I'm like, all right, you're explaining to somebody who has no idea what wrestling is, and say the very simplest things possible. Yeah.
So I cut it as short as I could, but I was like, man, I can't believe I'm writing a paper about wrestling in my junior year of college. And then people were instantly going to battle, like, oh, Folkstyle is better, Freestyle is better. What about Greco? Like, everything, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So, I mean, we talk about a lot in this podcast, Folkstyle or Freestyle. And one of the things we were texting about that I think people always get hung up on is they point to the NCAA tournament and they say there's nothing like it. And I say, I agree. And then they say there's 18,000 fans all screaming. And I agree. It is an amazing event. And the pro folk style people, the Shane Sparks, I know he's listening. He's probably on a bike right now. He's going to flip out and call me after this. The reason the NCAA tournament is what it is because of the college fan base. The fan bases are absolutely bananas, and they don't care. Yes, there's some exciting aspects to folk style wrestling, but at the same time, it's the fan base that when a new kid comes into Cornell, comes into Penn State, comes into Iowa, the fans continue to go to NCAAs. Jason Nickel goes to NCAAs every year. Bo hasn't wrestled in 4 years? Like, the fans of the sport, of the school, continue to go.
Yeah, I mean, I think about my girlfriend. She just graduated from Cornell. Like, she did not know anything really about wrestling. We've been dating for a while, so now she gets it. But we started dating kind of during my years off. So, like, this was her first year actually watching Folkstyle. Yeah. She hated which I she hated. But she hated her, and she's like, that was really cool. And that's my point. That production that the NCAA tournament does is awesome. It's the coolest tournament in the world. I don't know. I've wrestled in the World Championships. I've been to the Olympic Games. And I get that it's COVID, right? So it's limited attendance or whatever. But like, the NCAA tournament's a crazy, crazy, crazy tournament. If you had that many fans and had paint drying on in the middle of the mat, people would find a way to make it exciting.
Yep. You also have a season aspect to it. There's the aspect, right? And I was breaking Josiah's balls from Fanco because, he's very good at doing some of the things I do, which is just trying to build additional hype, tell some of the stories. And he's on press row. And one of the graphics he put out before your match was, before your finals, was that Lovett took you to OT. And he's like, this is what happened last time. It was the only time Yianni was taken to OT this year. Now they're wrestling again. And I went up to him afterwards. I kind of bumped him. I'm like, yeah, how'd that work out? But I get what he's doing. He's telling the storyline from what happened. And it's what happened earlier in the season. And that when you have RBY and DeSanto go at it again for the third time in the season, and you have the schools, that's a major thing. The team race is a major fan focus. And you don't have that you're not going to have that at the Open, at the Olympic trials, at the World Team trials. You have Tight Mercury and Sunkiss Kids and stuff, but that's not a college fan base.
Exactly. And the way I think about it is if I'm leaving on for the NCAA tournament and 5 kids stop me in the hallway and they're like, hey, we want to watch you guys wrestle. I can be like, if you put on the TV at any time between these hours, there'll probably be someone from Cornell out there.
Yep.
And then all of those Cornell fans are like, hey, Cornell guys on ESPN, let's watch it. I know, because people are like, wait, are you the guy from Cornell? Like, a lot of those fans aren't Yianni fans or Gable fans or whatever. I mean, a lot of them are, but equally as many are just Iowa fans, Penn State fans. Like, they have no horse in the race other than their university. And I feel like that's what makes the NCAA tournament so crazy. Is like, it's a joke. Like, everyone's stalling against Iowa because the fans are telling you. It's like people love where they went to school or what school they associate with. And that brings so much energy to the tournament. And then you add in the storylines from the year. You add in, the camera, lights, the sounds, the whole, Brian Hazard on the mic, the whole deal makes it crazy, right?
Yep. And I don't think people realize too that with the NCAA tournament, you're tracking these guys that, a lot of the discussion of the past week was how boring the Masters was this year. Because if you tune in on Sunday to the back 9, it was over. Scheffler won by a million, and like he 4-putted and he still won by a bunch. That's not exciting. For the Olympic trials, the World Team trials, or even the Open, you have to have such an appreciation for wrestling itself because there's no storylines. Like, if you look at 70 or 79 kilos at the Open, a lot of great guys wrestling, but there's not a lot of storylines to it. Or there's not, like, you can't say, like, I'm a Penn State fan, so if I'm watching NCAAs next year, I can't wait to root for some of these young kids that I don't follow one bit right now.
And that's what I mean. And you wouldn't be watching those guys if they weren't going to Penn State. The same way there's, a bunch of Cornell people suddenly love Meyer Shapiro, right?
Yep.
Because he's coming here. And otherwise, maybe 10% of those guys are watching the high school, the junior or cadet division at the US Open. But now they're like, well, we got this kid who might make the team. Let's watch it. And that's the NCAA tournament is like the final evolution of that thought process.
Correct. And to kind of bring this full circle, because it kind of went off on a tangent there on schools, I don't think if you swap out Folkstyle for Freestyle, number one, viewership does not go down one bit. And it seems like the more I've had, 100 wrestlers on this podcast, I think maybe 2 have said they like Folkstyle more than Freestyle. If you're asking the wrestlers what they like, and they all say Freestyle more than Folkstyle, I mean, I feel like that's the answer. If kids are more passionate about one, seems like there's more room for growth.
Yeah, I mean, my thing is just I feel like Folkstyle is catered towards those guys who are strong, or it promotes like strength, conditioning, and toughness, which are all awesome. They're super valuable. But that kind of sounds like powerlifting.
Yep.
I feel like Freestyle promotes like athleticism, skill, just because there's a lot more ways to get punished on a mistake. Folkstyle, like you can roll around on your back, you can get exposed, I can get slammed on the top of my head, but if we scoot out of bounds after, nothing happens. Little stuff like that. But I feel like with Freestyle, if you make a mistake, it's very easy to get capitalized on. So it incentivizes higher skill level of wrestling. And the conditioning is the same, because you see guys gas guys out in Freestyle all the time.
Yep.
It's just in Folkstyle, there's different ways to do it because of the addition of mat wrestling. But I could do 5 hours talking about Freestyle.
That's okay. That's what people are tuning in to listen.
Yeah. Even like another thing for me is people don't find mat wrestling. Now we'll phrase it in a way that we're talking about building the sport, in my opinion.
Yep.
People find mat wrestling interesting.
Yep.
It's not visually appealing. People love mat returns because you're picking them up and slamming them. But that's the same thing as a takedown. That's the same thing as a lift in Greco or a 4-point throw from your feet, right? So I just think Freestyle has a greater room for excitement. And people bring up, well, what about super fast tech falls? Good. Because then we can get on to the next match instead of watching one guy accumulate 7 minutes of riding time.
Yeah. And I think for the mat wrestling people, no matter what, I do think it's beneficial to consolidate to one style. And if you want to keep Greco as a second style, whatever, that's a different conversation. But I think if you consolidated folk style and freestyle to one style, no matter which style you pick, you'd give up something that's good from the other. It's not that folk style is 100% bad. And that's what some of the folk style people will say. Like, well, I love mat wrestling. Well, you can give something up because something else is better.
Yeah, it's give and take. And another thing is like our goal as a, maybe not, but you would think as a country, our goal is to win more world titles, more Olympic titles, more team titles, win more at the Olympic Games. So we should be practicing the sport that's going to make us do that.
Yep.
And like folk style has some things that I wish freestyle would adopt. Like I like I'm a criteria guy, but I think fans understand. It's an easier thing to understand. Tie scored. We watch someone like from a fan perspective. I think overtime is easier to understand. I personally like criteria, but I'm willing to fold on that one. But I think style, like people, the one I always hear is like, well, freestyle matches are boring too. Well, I'm like, well, yeah, but now you're just getting upset with wrestlers not like attacking. It's not like the rules allow for boring wrestling. Yeah. The problem with freestyle or with folk style, and you see it every once in a while, like Ben Darmstadt on our team, he's a nightmare on top. Yep. If he takes down in the first minute of the first period, he's going to ride you. So then it's like the bottom guy is not even thinking about escaping. He's just thinking about not getting turned. And a good guy, you're probably not going to turn him, right? They're really good. And then the second period takes top. Now it's 2 more minutes of Darmstadt trying to maul some guy. And he's doing a lot of really good stuff. But the problem is, someone who has no idea what wrestling looks like, they're like, all they're seeing is one guy kind of punching another guy while he's trying to rip his arm off. It's not as dynamic.
Yeah.
But when Darmstadt like rips a power half and pins a guy, people love that, right? But that's because they like the finality of it. It's like, oh, we got him, match over.
Yeah, and even if certain things that are like you said, a mat return, let's just say that's a 6 out of 10. Well, if the style was freestyle, there would still be exciting things that might be an 8 out of 10. And my wife was kind of like the same as your girlfriend. She started watching freestyle first because she really started becoming a fan kind of during COVID too, where there wasn't a lot of folk style. And when we went back to start watching folk style, she's like kind of scratching her head at certain things. Like, well, why are they doing that? Like freestyle's 100% better.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of rules in freestyle to promote action. The shot clock, the concept of a push out. So you can't run away from me. The one that's craziest to me is like, I can double leg you really hard and slam you on the top of your head. But if I don't drag my feet after, I don't get any points for it. I understand there has to be a level of control, right? We can't just go running guys out the door. But you want to incentivize big move things. Like, it's what people like. So like, even if I lat drop a guy, feet fly through the air, wham, crazy throw, and the guy kind of just like rolls off after, it's no points. So then it's like, well, what am I even doing this for? I'm not going. I'd rather just, scramble around, dive to the feet, leg pass, and kind of squeeze out a takedown. Talking about effort to point ratio. But in freestyle, if I had a really explosive move, I'm probably going to floor the guy. Not just me, anybody. You're probably going to floor the guy. And that is, it's scoring volume, right? So it's points on the board, and it's drawing in fans. You can be like, wow, look at what this guy did. You know what I mean? So I think for the sake of promoting the sport, I think freestyle is a better product. That's a better way to say what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and I think it was a great decision that women's wrestling in college is freestyle.
Yeah.
I think that was a great decision.
Because they want to win the world championships. That's what those little girls are thinking about. So it's like, well, let's get them there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think, too, it's funny, when you're watching folk style wrestling, there's so many comments you'll hear from people like, that would have been 2 in freestyle. That would have been 2 in freestyle. But you don't hear that vice versa. You never hear that when someone's watching freestyle, like, oh, in folk style, that would have been a point. It's only when you're watching folk style, you say, in freestyle, that would have been 2. That would have been 4, or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah. And I just think the rule set in freestyle, because of the 4-pointer, right, you're encouraging those, and folk style, right, they have feet to back. But the problem is, in freestyle, if I just throw you off the ground, I'm probably going to score, regardless of what happens after the fact. And, you know, even like the concept of a counter. So in freestyle, if I step in, let's say I go inside trip and I kind of just fall to my back, like it's a failed attempt, it's just 2 because you countered my move, which for me is the same as getting taken down. It's not like in folk style, if I try something like that and go to my back, it's 6 points. It's a huge deficit to find myself in. And especially because you got to take the guy down and cut him unless you're a freak on top. They're 1-point takedowns. With freestyle, because of how quickly you can put points up in both directions, there's a lot of comeback, and there's a lot of explosive, like, wow, that guy just scored that many points in a second. So I think the best way to explain what I'm trying to say is that the freestyle is more dynamic. I'm kind of saying the same things over and over, but to me, freestyle is very dynamic. It's a very diverse sport. You're introducing all of these new skills that don't really do anything for you in folk style. Whereas all of your folk style skills, except for a leg pass where you roll around on your back for a couple seconds before you get a takedown, you can do all those skills. You can put in legs in parterre, you can run a power half or whatever. You can do all those things. So it's this, most of the skills translate over. But in freestyle, now there's all these new skills that you're exposing to.
What's your take on the people who say one of the arguments against freestyle in women's wrestling in college is, let's say you have a program like Iowa and the guys are doing folk style and the women are doing freestyle, and they say it confuses the fans. There's 2 different rule sets.
That's why I'd like to make it all freestyle. But part of the thing too for the women, especially because it's growing so quickly, is a lot of those girls wrestle freestyle when they're little. Like they're going to the 10 and under division at the Hilton, the Hilton Open. They're going to wrestle folk style, but there's not a lot of folk style women's tournaments. It's all freestyle, you know what I mean? Yep. And the freestyle when you get to college and it trickles down. That's a perfect example, right? Their equivalent of the NCAA tournament is freestyle. So it's trickled down where most women's wrestling tournaments are freestyle. So a similar thing would happen, right? Because for kids, not everyone feels this way. But their goal, I'm not even going to say that because more people have actually told me they would rather win the NCAA tournament than become a world champion.
Yeah, I think that's because of the fans, the audience.
Yeah, and it's just it's what you get exposed to. It's on ESPN, right? It gets. Yep. So because of that, if tomorrow the NCAA was like, hey, we're making the NCAA tournament freestyle from now on, you would see all of these freestyle tournaments pop up. You would see tournaments like Super 32, flipping a freestyle. Yep. Because kids want to get good at what they want to achieve. Like if my goal is to achieve my goal is to become an NCAA champion, I'm going to wrestle as many tournaments that are going to get me to that point, right? So like for me, why I like freestyle so much is because my goals are, to succeed at the Olympic Games, World Championships.
Yeah.
So because of that, I do as much freestyle as I can, right? And it's the same thought process that would trickle down to the kids, in my opinion.
If you became a coach when you were all done competing in, let's say, 10 years, would you try to start advocating to actually change folk style to freestyle?
If I was like a college wrestling coach?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're moving pebbles, right? To move a mountain. Yeah. I think I'm a huge supporter of it. And obviously, selfishly, I like it better. But even aside from that, I think it's a better way to promote the sport. That's my biggest thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would advocate for it. I wouldn't go out of my way to start World War III over it, but every opportunity, I would promote it if I could. I think it's just a substantially better promotion of the sport.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. And there's obviously a lot of takes. Those people aren't on here, like Shane. I told Shane what time we were recording. I told him
live stream so people could get on here and challenge me.
Yeah, that might have to be a show, like just literally answering questions. The problem with that, and why I don't do more live shows too, is I feel like questions when you're getting typed to, they lack context, because it's hard sometimes to get out a whole question during a live show. And it's just like you rattle off like 6 words versus being able to speak. Like it would be cool to do a call-in question show.
Yeah, honestly. Maybe I should do that. Get a little podcast going and let people call in to tell me I suck for liking freestyle.
I actually had a tweet that I typed out last night that I never end up sending because I got distracted. I got a phone call or something. But my question was going to be, and I guess I'll ask you, my question was going to be, what senior level athlete do you think would have the best podcast? My answer would be, if college kids were included, I'd put you as one of the top, and I think Gilman would have an amazing podcast.
Gilman does know a lot of stuff.
And Gilman's so himself. And he's got, like, I love talking to that kid. I think if he had a podcast and the guest he'd get would be amazing.
Yeah, because he's kind of quiet, when you meet him, but you get to know him and he becomes very talkative. He has a lot of cool perspectives on stuff. So yeah, I think Gilman would actually be cool. I wouldn't have thought of that, but now that you say it, I definitely agree with you.
Well, I selfishly started like going back through all my guests because it's not even just like personality. It's who can carry a conversation for an hour, who could and I think your problem, if you had one, would be trying to cut it down to an hour from like 6.
Right.
So who do you think would be the best? Like, who is a wrestler that if they had a podcast, you'd have to tune in?
Oh man, like it would depend. Like I think if you could get Kyle and David Taylor on a podcast, they would say some great, very interesting things, which would be cool to listen to. I think they would be like an informative podcast. Like they would be like, look, here's all these things that we found and da da da.
Yeah.
But like an entertaining one, like David Carr, I feel like would be a really entertaining podcast guy. He's super high.
Yeah. Yep.
And he would be the kind of guy who would have all these crazy things going on. I feel like Gable, after doing the NCAA press conference with Gable this year, Gable would be really good at it. Like I remember, he's doing it, and they're asking us what are your goals for this weekend? They ask all the guys, and we're like, we're gonna wrestle our hardest, and win. Hopefully we win, blah blah blah. And it gets to Gable, and he's like, hey, we're all here to dominate. These guys won't say it. I'm gonna say it. We're here to dominate. That's it.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right.
It's funny you mentioned Gable and Carr because they're two people who, anytime somebody asks me, I get friends who get invited to a podcast or whatever, and they're asking me my advice. And I'm like, just be yourself and have a conversation. Don't sit there like you're interviewing or being interviewed. Even if you think you're talking too much as the host or whatever the case may be, people want to hear a conversation. They don't want to hear an interview. Most people want to hear a conversation, and Carr and Gable are both very good at when they hop on a podcast. They've both been on here a number of times, and they jump right into a conversation. It's not just sit back and ask me a question. Yeah.
I don't know if you watch the podcasts that everyone knows about, like Joe Rogan, it kind of feels like you're sitting in on his conversation with another guy.
Yeah. Him and Burroughs was the most amazing podcast because Jordan can talk to anybody for 3-4 hours.
Yeah.
All right. So freestyle's coming up. What's the game plan? You made the 2021 world team. I know you're obviously competing freestyle this year. Do you know exactly where you're competing, what you're doing?
There's some tentative things, right? But the big one obviously is the world team trials. I'm not going to the Pan Am Championships, clearly. There might be some small stuff between now and then, but the next big thing, 100%, right? Circle on the calendar is that May 21 and 23 weekend. So I get that's a boring answer.
I'm kind of surprised you're not going to the Open, only because I know how obsessed you are with wrestling. And I know that if you can wrestle a match, you will.
Yeah, it's big on trying to, control what I'm doing. So for one, I needed to qualify in 2019, but on top of all, I needed to get that experience. I had never wrestled somebody as good as Jordan Oliver or Frank Molinaro in a real match before. I've wrestled guys in the room, but now it's not like it's reversed, but it's I understand exactly what I need to do. And I know I don't know who I'm going to wrestle, but I know the characters, right? I know what I need to do. So I feel like my coach is really big with me this year, was like, just focus on, there's certain things I'm working on with my skill, my diet, conditioning, technique, everything, right? They're just keep focused on those. They're going to get guys in the room for me. I'm going to go places and train and compete. So I'm going to have those opportunities to get different feels. But going to the open, if anything, I'm cutting weight and weighing in and taking away from my training. That could be more valuable if I focused on certain things that are going to get me where I need to be. That's kind of a boring answer, but
no, it makes sense though. It's always an interesting perspective because you and I think everybody's different with what they're working on. I know there's some guys that want to go because they're working on something and maybe they don't have enough guys. They want to just go get those matches in, like in 2019 where you needed to go get those matches in. Are you going out there? I know your brother's wrestling. He's wrestling 57, right?
Yeah. Which is so, I mean, it's not crazy to me, but it's
crazy to me.
Man, he's old, right? Sorry, I'm getting phone calls from everyone. Yeah, it's crazy because he's old. He's old, you know what I mean? And yeah, so I didn't plan on being out there, but I'm sure I'll be glued to my phone all weekend watching. We got some senior level guys trying to make the team. We've got some really good young guys who are kind of testing the waters, right? So I will have a lot of good things to watch. But again, the whole point of me not going was to take advantage of the opportunity I have to train. So it's like if I'm going, I'm wrestling. I'm never going to be at a tournament and not wrestle.
Yeah,
if I could.
That makes sense. Speaking of exciting guys, news obviously broke yesterday. Meyer Shapiro is committed to Cornell. How excited were you for that?
No, I mean, he's I've been around him. I've gotten to know him a little bit, and he's like the right kind of guy, in my opinion, for what we do here. He's very, very focused. You can tell he's very skill oriented, very willing to learn, hyper competitive. Like I've wrestled with him, and I don't know, beat him, and he was like, it ruined the day. Dude, I suck. I'm so bad. Like that's awesome. You know? That's a guy who's like not backing down to anybody. You know what I mean? He's a junior in high school. I don't even know if he turned 18 yet.
Well, and he said that Willie put out a 10-minute interview today with him. And he said, like, when I went to Cornell, like I felt like the guys around me, they walk in the room with that same attitude and mentality that I want to be when I'm there. Like that's their mindset is what I want to be. Their attitude is what I want. Like, and I'm like, okay, so this guy's like Yianni. Like there's that same kind of that's the culture he was looking for. It makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, obviously everyone's got crazy expectations for him, right? But I think he's gonna do really well. He's got the right approach to it. He's very focused on his skill. He's very same things I said, right? But obviously this is the right environment in my opinion. But and it'll be cool because his first year will probably be my first year out of college, so I'll be a little player coach kind of deal, which will be cool. I've realized these classes coming in are the first classes, like this year's juniors and some of this year's seniors, if they're going to take a red shirt, are guys that I'm not going to be on the team with. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. So it'll be cool. I'm kind of playing that player coach role with these guys and getting to know them in a different way. You know what I mean? If I had a kid on a recruiting trip, 3 years ago, I probably would have tried to get to know him. But all right, this guy's going to be like my teammate in the future. But now it's like, I might be this kid's coach. Let me get to know him and see what he's like. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Speaking of that, like my final topic here, and I'll let you go. I know you got to go train in a few minutes. First of all, have you been offered an NIL bag yet from another school? Has anybody tried to poach you?
No, I'm not a sellout. That thing, I don't want to call people sellouts. That's not fair. But there's certain guys who you could definitely pay to leave, and there's certain guys who you couldn't pay to leave. You know what I mean? But I don't blame the kids that much because it's like, all right, I'm tight for money. I'm working summer jobs so I can get through, and then bang, here comes, insert college coach's name here, offering me 6 figures a year. Well, suddenly that seems like a great school to me. You know what I mean? But that can't be, I don't know, that can't be legal, right?
No, it's definitely not legal. You're not allowed to contact a student athlete outside of the transfer portal.
Yeah, right.
You're just not allowed to. But I think what people are doing is, and I think where people are going to get caught and mess up is you kind of see this where, like, let's say in a relationship, a guy or a girl cheats on somebody. A lot of times they're approached because they look like they're in a place of weakness or vulnerability.
Yeah.
And the people who have a super, super solid relationship, you don't see, first of all, they're not, let's say, going out. So they're not in opportunities where they could fall into something. I think with wrestlers and athletes, what's happening is if somebody looks vulnerable, if somebody looks weak, they're definitely more prone to be like, hey, are you not happy? Would you maybe want to come here? And the guys that they know, hey, these guys are just not going anywhere, are going to get less offers because they know you're as diehard for a school as anybody I know.
Yeah.
I don't think people are going to reach out to you, not because almost every school in the country would want to have you, because they know this probably ain't happened. Move on to the next guy.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same deal. Like, just to use someone on the knee, like, I can't imagine Dayton Fix is getting calls to leave Oklahoma State.
Yep,
I
agree with that.
And there's other guys like that, right? But he was just like the first guy that came to mind. Like, he's the most Oklahoma State guy.
Yep.
Met before.
I do.
Like,
yeah,
I don't know. I just think it's shady business. Because then the other thing is like, all right, I'm trying not to name names, but let's say I got offered $100,000 a year, $200,000 a year to go to Penn State.
Take it.
But Roman Bravo Young, who's right, I'm a 3-time champ. He's a 2-time champ. He's not getting paid because no one's trying to poach him because maybe they don't think he's going to leave, hypothetically, right?
Yep.
Now he's like, well, what the heck? This guy's getting $100,000 a year. I'm getting nothing. I'm a 2-time NCAA champ. I'm leaving. You know what I mean?
And I can tell you that's already happening.
I just named the first guy that came to mind, but you know what I mean? It starts to get shifty like that.
And it's already happening with athletes where somebody is going to get a deal. And I'm even hearing, and this could be complete speculation, student X gets an offer. So let's say you get an offer for 100,000, and let's say you go to Gray and you say, dude, they're giving me 100 grand. I kind of want to take it. And Gray says, I'll get you 80,000 from a booster if you stay here, and you stay there. And now Vito goes to Gray and says, all right, maybe I'm not worth 80,000, but can I get 40,000? Now what? You have a whole roster of kids that's like salary.
That's what I mean. Then it's like, I feel like if they don't get a handle on this, college coaches are going to start being, well, at Cornell, we give our national champs this much a year, and we give our All-Americans this much a year. And then someone's going to be like, well, at Iowa, we give our champs this. Because, I don't know. You can't just have like an art, like it. All things eventually move towards equilibrium, right? If you don't handle it, the coaches will find their own way of like navigating this in a way where everybody's going to do it.
Yep.
But it's just a matter of like how shady people are. Like the NCAA really is willing to let people get, because it can get very shady, and it sounds like I'm bad mouthing people, which I don't want.
Listen, I've already said it. I don't blame the kids for taking money. If I'm that young, like when I was 18 years old, I was literally living out of my car. To fathom getting $100,000, $150,000, that is, I would take it and run. I was literally living on a car at that age. I can't fault that. Now, if it's somebody like you and you're very loyal and you wouldn't take the money, great. Like, I'm not saying everybody offered a bag should take one. I just understand if they take it, why they take it.
Yeah, and my thing, even like the coaches, my thing is like, I'm assuming they're not breaking the rules because of how public this information is, right? Like, whatever. We know what we're talking about. It's very public information. So I'm assuming that they found some way to like navigate the rules, which is not shocking to me because I've spoken with our compliance officer, because I'm like, hey, like right when this all happened in July, I'm like, what can I do? And she's like, I don't even know. I don't know.
Yeah.
And it took, so I feel like, and our lady's on top of it. Like now she's gotten understanding, but there's even still things where if I asked her a question, this happened maybe a month or two ago. I asked like, hey, what's the rules behind this? And she's like, oh, don't sign that yet. Let me check. Like she didn't. And like, It's just, there's there's so many things that got introduced just by being like athletes can get paid now that I think in general the universities fell behind and they didn't understand like the level that it was going to get to.
Yep.
So because of that, I'm sure there's a lot of opportunities to like finagle the system.
Yep.
And we're watching the finagling unfold, right? So I think either they got to put some more clarification or on those rules or add a couple rules, or they just got to like coaches buy kids and it's going to turn into a professional college wrestling.
Yeah. And it's nuts because I think some coaches are aware of what's going on, but are going to plead ignorance. Like, well, I can't control that guy or whatever. I think other coaches are taking accountability and saying, if it happens here, I should be the one to know about it, whatever. And I think some coaches are definitely going to start playing within the rule set that's being given, where as of now, it sounds like a college coach can seek out deals for their athletes. And if that rule is in place, then that's all you need.
You know what's crazy? This is crazy. Mike Gray, our coach, told that he is not allowed to he's not allowed to bargain on my behalf.
Okay.
So, for example, when I was signing with Spartan and I had people like Brutus and whoever else reaching out to me, I was like, Mike, can you talk to these guys? And he's like, I'm not allowed to. He's like, technically, I'm not even allowed to give you advice the way that the rules are written.
Interesting.
So, but phone calls don't get recorded. Like in-person meetings don't get recorded if it's just you and me talking at lunch. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So
there's plenty of ways that that rule, I'm sure, very easily get pushed under the rug. But when I remember, when I was signing with Spartan, I asked Mike for help, and he's like, I don't even know if I'm allowed to tell you, really. And we had to talk to Amy Foster, as our compliance, and she was like, yeah, coaches can't be affiliated with contracts. It's between the athlete and whoever he hires, if you hire a lawyer or whatever, and the company. And I think they're going to avoid this, but the problem is it's really hard. It's hard to, there's nothing stopping, I'm going to name a different school. There's nothing stopping, Pat Papalizio there's nothing stopping a guy like that from meeting with their biggest donor at lunch, talking about a kid they find is very interesting. And then they walk away and then suddenly that kid gets up. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that Papalizio would do that. I'm just trying to continue to name different coaches. But my point is it's very, I don't know, seems very gray area. You know what I mean?
It is, no pun intended.
Yeah. Right.
But I do think too, if I'm in your shoes, or if I'm in, if I'm in Roman Bravo Young's shoes and Cal's my coach, Kate's my coach, I'm going to want to say, Coach, what do you think about this? I obviously trust you with so much to exclude them from something that's such a critical component to it. It intertwines with it.
Some of my contracts, like the ones with Spartan, are going through the Olympic trials of 2024. So it's it was a big decision, right? And yeah, I mean, technically, they're supposed to stay out of it.
Now, I heard that contracts can only go through your eligibility. Can they extend through past your academic eligibility?
So they can, because my contract is not affiliated with the university.
Okay.
So I'm not getting paid Yianni D Cornell wrestler. It's just Yianni D. And that's the point with NIL things. It's they're just paying me as a person, regardless of my status at Cornell. Now, if it was a contract that was somehow written where it's I need to be wearing blank during the wrestling season, then I have to be posting this many times during the wrestling season. Well, then it probably is written to the end of my eligibility, right? Because once I'm out of eligibility, what am I gonna do?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's a crazy world, man. It really is. Watching it and then talking about, there was so much last week after Real goes to Iowa, and then all these other names. I'm getting wrestlers and coaches calling me with all these deals, and now it's been pretty quiet the last week because so much happened so quick. And I think everybody took a step back with how public it became and
I
said,
was like,
wow,
whoa.
yeah, we got to rethink how we go about this. So,
Well, yeah, because in our generation, like there's no such thing as privacy anymore. I can't do something without the whole world knowing it. You know what I mean?
Well, it doesn't
So
help to leave 100,000 followers. Like that's a lot of people to see stuff. Like,
yeah, right. And that's that's the biggest issue, if you ask me, is like, well, it's not an issue. It's the only thing keeping it from getting, in my opinion, completely insane, is that people find things out really quickly. If we were doing something shady, or Penn State or whoever was doing something shady, people would hear about it.
yep.
So I'm sure in the back of every coach's head, they're like, man, I'd love to pay this kid to come here, but I really do not want to get caught paying this kid to come. You know what I mean?
And I'm sure it's only been a couple of weeks since a lot of this conversation happened. And like I said, I'm sure people are taking a step back now and saying, because like you said, a lunch conversation isn't recorded. This conversation isn't recorded. And I was talking to a buddy yesterday and I gave him an example. I said, here's a perfect example of how stuff isn't traced. If I tell my wife to go to lunch with Yanni's mom and she talks about BASCH solutions and wanting Yianni to go to Penn State, and Yanni's mom goes talks to Yianni, none of that's traced. None of that's like
you and your wife and her friend and her son.
Right. It's wild. And it's like and none
somewhere some coach is gonna watch this and be like, that's a good idea.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not trying to give people ideas on how to successfully do this. I mean, I'm a creative for a living, but I mean, it's happening.
Yeah. And it's like, I don't know, like, because the rules were changing. Like, even, I talked to my compliance officer when she said the thing, like, Mike, and this is where I don't even know the rules anymore. When in July, Mike couldn't help me. And, I couldn't have an agent. And in March, I can have an agent now. And she's like, well, the rules were reinterpreted and that stuff's okay. You're allowed to have representation, blah, 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 blah. So the other thing too is maybe at Cornell, there's a rule that's interpreted this way. And at Penn State, it's taken this way. And at Ohio State, it's taken this way.
Yeah, and I'm already hearing too, like the state laws, like what New York allows versus what Pennsylvania allows, and what even at a state level, you have a school level, you have a state level. There's so many different factors in play there.
Yeah, and it's just like, I don't know. Our Mike has made it very clear. Like every time I get a contract, I got it. My compliance officer probably hates me. Every time anyone sends me anything, if I'm even thinking about signing it, it goes right to her, and I'm like, hey, what is the rules of this? Can I do it? Blah blah blah. And like, there's been times where I've been telling people, like, I'm like, hey, I can't sign your contract unless you take blank off. And they're like, well, we're not willing to do that. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So I think that everybody, and that's the wrestlers, the coaches, the schools are kind of learning as it's happening. So there's certain things that, like, maybe now this is happening, kids are like, or the schools are going to be like, all right, we got to look at these rules. We can't have that. Like,
can you give an example of something you had to take out without it being clear who it was?
Like if someone wanted to pay me 10 grand for winning the world championships, they can't do that.
So just pay for play, basically.
Yeah, because that's like the last thing that they're holding on to for us as amateur athletes is pay to play.
Yeah.
So you can write like a bonus in for me winning, technically.
Yeah.
I'm sure people find their workarounds, right?
But yeah, and there's ways, because even like there's ways that you can get around it, of even if it's not a bonus, it's all of a sudden if you win and now you're more committed. If like there's so many ways around things. It is interesting. But listen, I know you got to run to practice. I only want to keep you for an hour. So go train. The phone keeps falling over.
Phone calls and people. It's madness.
You're a busy guy, man. I get it. All right, buddy. Well, thank you for coming on. I'm sure I will see you soon. Go Big Red. All you Cornell fans. Everybody says like I'm like a Penn State fan as it gets, but like I root for my guys in their schools. So like you're my guy. I'll root for Cornell for you. Like people don't understand that you can like root for goodness. You can root for different people at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, Yeah, you can have friends. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Great.
All right. Go train. I'll catch you later, man. Thanks for taking the time. See you, buddy.
And the beat goes on.